And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Yo, Lord Willin, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pepsi's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Della Croce and Gotti. I know wild nights, Havana nocturne. Light up a cigar and watch your spot burn. You'll get patty whacked, I'm tough like Irish dock workers. Run with guys, hooligans and block lurkers. Corner berserkers, street savvy soldiers. You better pay. Don't make me say I told you. Code you don't betray, I say what I mean. Providence and Brooklyn all the way to the Bean. I'd rather be unseen, like Vinny the Chin. I don't gotta go to Vegas to see cities of sin. Pull the pin, drop bombs like Danny Green. I write homicide like the murder machine. Lansky Luciano, mastermind the racket. Up in the clam house with a milli in my jacket. Move around when the streets get darker. Pay homage to real bosses like Gambino and Patriarcha. Mob talking, but you don't talk to the mob. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, we stay on our job. This is Mob Talk, straight from the streets. Mob Talk, the life over beats. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, bringing you the real. Kill all rats, you already know the deal. This is Mob Talk, straight from the streets. Mob Talk, the life over beats. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, bringing you the real. Kill all rats, you already know the deal.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Canarsie. And we've got a big one this week. We've got a Q&A followed by Johnny Dio. Johnny Dio was important and instrumental in a lot of ways, and a lot of people may not know who this is, and the reason why I chose to do him is because he's really responsible for Jimmy Hoffa sort of getting his fingers into the Teamsters to begin with. Without Johnny Dio helping sort of navigate those waters for Hoffa and putting things in place that would allow Hoffa to sort of jump past people, then maybe Jimmy Hoffa never becomes who he was, and maybe history gets changed in the mix. So if you're not familiar who Johnny Dio is today, we're going to talk a lot about him. And like I said as well, we're going to do a Q&A. Now, here's the thing with the Q&A. And I've said this a lot of times, and I don't know if it's necessarily that people believe me or not, but I cannot, certain questions that get asked to me are just so fucking big in the grand scheme of things that I can't really justifiably answer it within 2 minutes, 3 minutes, because you figure I get 150, 200, 300 questions a week, and I try to answer the bulk of those before the show, through Messenger and etc. But all that being said, if I don't particularly answer your question, I've said it a million times, either it's been asked a million times before, or it's just so in-depth that I really can't give it a quick spin, because there's so many different particles that go into that question. So I've started putting some of those questions aside for another day. And if you asked me a big question, like for instance, I think the opening question today is about some stuff, and I'm only going to cover one half of it, because if I do both, I'm going to be here for 3 hours explaining it. So be patient. I will get to it really as quick as I can. And the other thing too, I get a lot of messages with who's running the Gambinos, who's running the Genoveses, who's running this, who's running that. I'm not going to go there. I never have. I never will. And it's not because I don't know the information. It's just a matter of I try to keep things in a certain perspective and narrative. And I know the next question that's going to come from people is, well, you talk about Philadelphia. And the reason why I do is because, first of all, there's a lot of nonsense that goes on there. You cannot believe much of what you hear, much of what you read. A lot of things, especially coming from Philadelphia, are nonsense. So I speak about it in a way that I'm able to just navigate the waters for people and point you, maybe not to the direction, but point you away from the direction of what everybody else wants you to believe. That's why I can do that. I have never outed anybody. I've never, ever talked about things I may or may not know. I basically just say to you, this is what's being reported there. This is the person or persons that are being alleged to be involved in A, B, and C. And I simply know different, and I know the truth, and that's why I push you the other direction, not to deflect in any sort of fashion or form. I do it because you're believing nonsense, you're believing lies, and there's a big difference between what I do and what other people do. And so I just try to keep it on a level. All right, so the next thing is the paintings are for sale. If you are interested, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back to the last show. I talked about it a bit. You can jump over on Facebook, type in Mob Talk Radio. There's a post there where you can see what they look like, see the prices, etc., etc. So if you're interested in some Mafia artwork, just let me know in a message or whatever. We'll work it out, and I'll tell you what's going on. But for those that are on Facebook, you can go over to Facebook and check that out. Just type in Mob Talk Radio. Go through the posts. There's a couple of different posts, and you'll see them. And we can go from there. As far as the website, that will be coming. I'm trying to wait for this Flanagan's TV show stuff to start. Pre-production now and getting into that. And then once I'm able to, nail a lot of that down with dates and stuff, then it leaves me a gap where I can work on other stuff. So that's where that kind of stands. It's coming. It's coming, but it's just I want to get the Flanagans rolling before all of that. If you don't know what the Flanagans are, it's a TV show that is going to be filming a pilot in Queens. I believe we are going to shoot some stuff in Philadelphia as well, but I don't want to get into all of the sort of parameters of that. All right, so where are we at? What's going on in the Mafia world? There's a whole bunch of stories I could cover. There's 5 or 6 that we're breaking. Mainly overseas, but there is something I wanted to cover, and it is Philip Narducci. And the reason why I am going to cover that is because, in case you're living under a rock, obviously, Philip was granted bail, as well. His co-defendant, Joey Gallo, was granted bail as well, and so that's a good thing. I think when it comes, a lot of people have questions about bail, and it just, this is one of those things where they can use the past against you. Even if you were, and I'll give you a reference to myself, because I think it's rather than use somebody else, I'll use myself as a reference. So I had gotten arrested for something back in 2000, I believe it was, 2001. And basically, I ended up pleading out, pled guilty, got a bunch of fucking prison time, but I was lucky that the judge took pity on me and just sort of hammered me with a ton of probation, a ton of fines. It was ridiculous. And then about a year after that, the FBI came to my house. Okay, that's the second thing. That could have gotten my probation violated just because of some of the things they were asking me about and accusing me of. Then you move past that about 6 months. Then I got rearrested for something else. And when I was at my bond hearing, the magistrate who handled the bond hearing literally looked at me and said, well, you were convicted or pled guilty to this. Therefore, my bond went from fucking, it should have been peanuts to something fucking crazy. And that's what they can do. They can use past allegations, they can use past convictions against you to inflate your bond. But lucky in my situation, the judge, for whatever fucking reason, and I will never understand this was in a different city, he pulled it up and says, well, you're being basically accused of the same kind of shit again, and this is in 3 years. It's and he looked at me just kind of and scoffed at me and says, you're being accused of the same type of shit again. You're not learning your lesson. Well, I hadn't been convicted of nothing else, and so I felt and I'm not going to get an attitude, because then I'm just going to sit in a cell, and that's not fruitful for anybody. Believe me, nobody wants to do that. So I let him pretty much admonish me and tell me I was an idiot and I was going to go back to prison and I was going to do a shitload of time because of the first thing. I would have been violated on that. But the end result was I played the system. I'm not going to lie. I played the system a little bit and made some stuff up, and I got out on my own recognizance, which I couldn't fucking believe. And then I ended up being found not guilty of the shit I was accused of. And I don't want to get into all of that, but I'm only talking about this in terms of the way the bond works. You can get recognizance, your own recognizance, when you've done nothing wrong, and you just basically promise to show up in court. You're not going to fuck around. People that get murder charges, racketeering charges, often aren't going to just get let out. Anything that involves any kind of violent predicate act, forget it. You're not going anywhere. So if the things that I had done were considered insanely violent, there's no way that I get out of that cell that day. That means I'm going to sit there until my trial starts, or I'm going to have a second bond hearing. So the point is that Philip was able to get a bond hearing, got bonded out. He's out. He's doing well. But what I wanted to talk about was how crazy this case is for a minute. I have covered, give or take, a couple of different trials, not just in this state. I've been to other states and done this as well, and I've seen a lot of bullshit. And I've seen charges that get brought up, and sometimes the charges, everybody knows a guy from the corner of the neighborhood that's a real shithead, can't keep his nose out of trouble. You're sitting at the end of a bar, and you're, Tommy D, he got arrested for this, and you kind of sit there, and there's no plausible deniability in your mind, because your thought process is, he's kind of a scumbag and gets in trouble, so it sounds right. But then every once in a while you hear shit that just doesn't make no sense from beginning to fucking end. Now, what I'm about to say is speculative on my behalf. It's not based on facts. It's based on my opinion. So for those who are going to say, well, that wasn't reported, so that's not fucking true, that's not the point I'm trying to make. First of all, anytime you do 30 years in fucking prison, all right? You have a moniker. You have, obviously, Phil, in so many ways, had a notorious reputation back in the day. Now, when somebody gets out of prison, they're going to fight their last name the rest of their lives. They're going to fight any associations, any assertions, any crime that they were convicted of, especially when you want to shoehorn it into an organized crime case. It doesn't matter what that guy does. He could have gotten out of fucking prison and become a fucking butcher, and they would have found a fucking way to make him look like he was the fucking Antichrist. That's what the FBI does, because God forbid anybody get out and really make a living. It looks circumspect, and that's the problem with the FBI. That's the way that the FBI has always been. It's funny because you look at all these court cases, and a judge often will say, "You're a young guy. You're going to pay for what you did, but I hope this is a learning lesson, and I hope that when you get out, you change your life." So they do that, and then the FBI fucking hammers them. Now, this case is a little bit different in terms of there's obviously a rat. From everything that I know, this guy's a real shitheel, a real scumbag, a real lowlife piece of shit who was ratting on other people prior to this. And so that's what makes this interesting and I'm trying not to get too long-winded and talk way too long about this, but here's the point. First of all, let me try to make this a little smaller, okay? So basically, you go to a prison for allegations, blah, blah, blah. You get acquitted of other stuff. Convictions get overturned. Okay, fine. You get out. You open up a business with your wife, and it's a very, 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 very successful business in a part of town where a lot of people don't want to fucking start a business. That's just the truth. So you become a huge fucking success. That automatically puts you on the map with the FBI, because there's no way this guy could come out, put some money together, and start a successful business, because, miracles don't fucking happen. I've always been of the belief, and it doesn't matter necessarily in Philip's case, but what it matters to me is there are guys who bust their ass 24/7 when they get out of the fucking can, and they make a life for themselves. The problem is it's not even the company you keep. It's the company from your past. And that's what this situation is about. So we take this informant in this particular situation. This guy was already ratting out other fucking people. Now, what I can tell you, which nobody has fucking reported, is that this alleged loan that the FBI is alleging that was an illegal loan shark loan, there was extortion involved, a little physical violence involved, and etc. This is what the government alleges. Now, here's my thing. All right? Take it, and I'm going to make 3 solid points here for you. The first thing is, when you've done 30 years in fucking prison, you have missed out on fucking everything. Everything. Kids, vacations, Christmases, family. Okay, so that's the first thing. You get out, you're going to have all of these things placed on top of you. You think when you get out of prison, you can just go here, go there, and there's not going to ever be a problem. You have to live by a certain fucking set of rules. And believe me, you go sideways once, they're going to violate you, and back you go. So nobody's stupid enough to do that. All right? But the way that the FBI is saying this is that it was originally a $20,000 loan. This guy just fucking refused to pay on it. So Phil gets mad, and then we can kind of fill in the gaps of what we think happened from there. At least according to the FBI. And if you read mafia books, I'm sure it doesn't take a whole lot for you to try to figure out what the FBI is alleging there. It's more or less, you didn't pay, I want my fucking money, don't make a prick out of me. Then it gets nasty. Then it gets a little heated, gets a little wily. All right? And that's what the FBI has alleged. But here's the thing. And I know specifics about this case, not a ton, but enough to sort of tell you something that nobody else is saying. So Phil gets out, successful business, whatever. The thing is this. This loan was not, at least to my knowledge, a 20 grand loan. This loan was for a lot of other, this loan was one legitimate. Legitimate meaning notarized, all parties signed an agreement. That's not a fucking illegal loan. That's a legit loan. That's a legitimate loan, okay? And so if somebody comes to me and asks me for a loan, I get a notary, I get lawyers to look over it, and when everybody signs the dotted line, it's over and done with. The terms are right there on the paper. But here's what happened. This guy didn't want to pay back no loan. He wanted to try to rip people off. And he's already ratting on people anyway. He's already under the FBI's fucking loving kisses and arms. And what happens is he is given information on other people that the FBI are investigating. The problem is these informants, and I could rattle off 20 informants that are like this. They will give the FBI all kinds of information, but it becomes a proffer session where they're not giving the FBI quite enough that the FBI needs in order to get themselves out of fucking trouble. So they got to drop bigger names. And how this all sort of allegedly goes down is he says to the FBI, who's really not getting what they need for other things, he says, oh, well, Philip Narducci gave me a loan. First of all, he's not being honest about how the loan came together or to fruition to begin with. All right? He's not lying about the depth of the loan, the price of the loan, the terms, whatever it is. So here's my point, and let me make this very clear. If this was an illegal loan, why the fuck would anybody in their right mind, especially knowing that you have a past, the FBI is watching, you have a successful business, why would anybody put themselves in a position to go to prison for 20 fucking years and get a fucking and get a fucking thing notarized? Who does that? Gangsters don't do that. Gangsters don't notarize fucking loans. That's not how it works. And the second thing is that if we are to believe, let's play what the FBI says for a second, that Phil didn't get his fucking money, so he sends his co-defendant there to extrapolate the fucking money. Okay? First, second of all, this is a very important point. If you believe what the FBI alleges, that Philip Narducci is where he's at in the Cosa Nostra of Philadelphia, which is laughable, all right? But this guy has a reputation. He had when he was young of not somebody to fuck with. So A, you go and you get a loan from the guy knowing he has a reputation. That's the first thing. B, it's notarized, so it's legal and legitimate. That's B. C, why on God's earth, if you have a reputation, do you need to send anybody to do anything? Philip wasn't caught talking on no tapes. Philip wasn't caught with photographs beating nobody up. It's all bullshit. It's all nonsense. And because Philip Narducci has a fucking name based on a reputation from 30 fucking years ago, that's music to the FBI's ears. They are like coming in their pants to hearing that Philip Narducci is doing this and doing that. And it's fucking nonsense. Then, so with the rat going to the FBI, oh, well, you know, Philip loaned me this. Doesn't show the fucking paperwork. There's copies of that. And all of a sudden, it goes from being just a little piece of shit motherfucker who didn't want to pay a legal debt, a legal, not illegal, a legal fucking debt in an agreement that was notarized. He wants to get from under it, doesn't want to pay the guy. So now he's got a great story. Well, this guy fucking threatened to bash my fucking head in. And now it becomes an organized crime case, and it becomes this overinflated bullshit nonsense case. And that's the point. And this is what the culture has become with the federal government and rats. Somebody told me, and that person's going to know who they are, he just joined the Rat Liars Club. And that's what they do. And from my understanding, this isn't the only guy this guy borrowed money from. Now, whether or not those were legit loans, I'm not sure. But the point is like, do you really think that if you have a notorious, as a guy that isn't going to fuck around, Look at Joe Pesci from Casino. You put my money to sleep, I'm going to put your fucking brain to sleep. That sort of mentality, right? So if you have that reputation, why do you need to send a third fucking guy to go get your money? Isn't it smarter to just go get the shit yourself? And believe me, the truth is, and I'm not saying this about Philip, I'm not saying this about anybody that I may or may not know there, but I think that the misconception people not from Philly don't get is South Philly guys don't fuck around. If you fuck with them, you fuck with their livelihood. They don't need to send a third party to go see you. They do it their goddamn selves. But there's no proof of that. There's no proof of that. I find it hard to believe that a guy like Phil could go to some shithead's place and toss him around. Phil was at his fucking restaurant 24/7. This guy doesn't eat, doesn't sleep. He works. Nothing but nice. And so my argument I'm making is you can't believe all this nonsense that's being spewed. Your Dave Ratweisers, your George Anastasias are going to bend this, twist this, and fuck it so hard that you believe what it is, and it's not. And I'll give you one more interesting point. These pricks, these motherfuckers, went out and said, he's got $300,000 on the street. How the fuck would you even know that? Where did that figure come from? Is that like pillow talk from a Friday night? I mean, what is that? 300,000. Come on. Get real. Because if we're going to believe what the FBI says, right, and it was a 20 grand loan and it got inflated to 100,000, what the fuck? He's going to put another 300,000. So now it's 320,000 on the street? Don't listen to what Dave Ratweiser, especially that guy, says. Because they always preface their little lies by saying, we heard it from a fucking street guy. What fucking street guy in their right name is going to talk to either one of those jerk-offs? I can understand it from the perspective of, you're putting lies on the street about me. You know, that's not really true. This is kind of why it's... I totally get... First of all, I don't get talking to them to begin with, but if you had to, fine. I get it. You want to set the fucking record straight. Totally understand that. But these guys are outright fucking lying. And that's the worst part about it. Show me the $300,000. Where's that? I read the fucking indictment. Nowhere does it mention $300,000. They're making it the fuck up. And you know how you can tell when a prick is making shit up like that? Is when they're talking in the little fucking video and he goes, well, word is Philip Narducci has $300,000 on the street. At least that's what I heard from Street Guy. Hey, come on. There's no reason to even fucking... If you had any credibility as a fucking journalist, you don't have to preface who your fucking source is. You don't have to inflate your ego like you're fucking somebody. Because your reputation as a journalist should carry you forward. Doesn't matter what you do. You write 10 books. They're all good sellers. People know they can deal with you on a level. But you can't with those guys. Because they lie. You know, they sat here and said all this shit like 3 months... Like, not 2 months before Phil got arrested. He's retired, he's out of the life, which is exactly the truth. So they were telling the truth there, and then they're sitting outside the guy's house when he gets arrested. How'd they find that out? You know how they found that out? Because they talked to the FBI, they got a tip, and they can't fucking respect the guy enough to just fucking stay out of it, read the indictment when it drops, and then sort of do what you do from there. Nah, they gotta sit outside the motherfucker's house. Got to get that money shot of this guy who got fucked by a rat and people making shit up. And so that's the thing. Your reputation always precedes you in the streets. Even if you're retired, for Christ's sakes. Your reputation precedes you. He doesn't need nobody else. The loan was fucking legitimate. The FBI is not going to tell you that. Nobody has reported that. You know why nobody is going to report that? You know why Dave won't report it? You know why the fucking George Anastasia is not going to report that? Because it's boring. Because it takes away the validity of the FBI's fucking case. Right there, period, end of story, exclamation fucking point. And that's my point. You cannot believe. Sure, do they have good information? Sure. They pass along some good stuff once in a while that's accurate, but for the most part, 85% of the shit they say is fucking nonsense. Nonsense. And I've proved it time and time and time again when they put out a lie, and then I come right back the next day and I say, this is a lie, and here's exactly why. Then they try to cover up their nonsense by saying, well, they take a moral stance that, well, we're not going to put out an informant's name. No, because they like informants. They love John Vesey. They love Ron Previty. They loved him. They love another fucking asshole from New Jersey, worthless lying sack of shit too. They love him. But they're going to take a moral high ground that they're not going to put an informant's name out there. Bitch, I put the fucking guy's name out there fucking 8 hours after this happened. Because I won't hesitate. He's a rat. He should be outed as a fucking rat. Because that's what he is. He's a rat who's lying and making up shit, proffering and giving the FBI whatever the fuck they need to make a fucking goddamn a fucking ghost case, which Philip will beat, hands down, easily. And that's what this happens in Philly sometimes. I don't get it. Every other day there's an indictment coming down with these guys. But yet nothing seems to happen. And I've heard the same thing, so it's not like there's not validity to that. But it's just sometimes the FBI wants to spin a fucking narrative to get guys shaking a little bit. Listen, I don't think, let me tell you something about Philadelphia that you people may not understand, who aren't from there, haven't been there, haven't associated with anybody there. You think they're scared of the FBI or any cops or any fucking indictments? They don't give a fuck. We are who we are. We do what we do. That's the bottom line. Bring it if you got it, and we'll bury it and beat it. They beat cases left and right. And it's no secret to me why they do. Because there ain't no case to fucking begin with. There's no case to begin with. Because it's all nonsense, all lies. Some people will just believe shit that's fed to them. Even if it looks like shit on a plate, smells like shit, they're going to take it in and believe it anyway. But my last argument for my compunction of morality with these two fucking goofballs there is that their morality seems to stop at fucking good guys. That's where their morality stops with them. Oh, it's okay to fucking to put Ron Previty on a fucking statue, to put John Vesey on a fucking statue, Philip Leonetti on a fucking statue. But then they're going to sit out of the side of a motherfucking alleged social club and taking photos. Here's his name. Here's his rank. Here's what the gossip is. Fuck you. You know better than fucking Geraldo or Jerry Springer when you do that shit. You have some sort of lopsided fucking morality about a rat who is the lowest fucking thing, the lowest common denominator, the biggest piece of shit to ever live. You got no problem kissing them on the fucking mouth. Then you're going to fuck a guy outside of a fucking bar or outside of wherever the fuck it is, putting a name, a title, a place, and gossip next to him. And who do you think's going to hear that information and run with it? The fucking FBI. That's what my beef is with those two idiots, and that's what it always will be. You cannot argue moral compunction with me when you write a book filled with lies from page 1 to 360 that's been proven to be lie after lie after lie after lie. You lie. Just be honest. You fucking lie. And yeah, sure, what I do, and I'm not one to fucking put myself in any higher pedestal than anybody else. But the one thing I will never do is I'm not going to take photos with guys. I'm not going to post a photo of I don't know, Carlo Gambino the 15th. Look, me and Carlo Gambino the 15th hanging out in fucking Bushwick. I'm not going to do that. There's no reason for me to do that because I don't get anything out of hanging out with people. If I like guy A, it's because he's a good guy. He's a stand-up guy. He's a friend. Not because of what people allege. Who you are as a person makes you who you are, not who you fucking know. And that's the exact example in this particular case with Phil. He has a reputation, a past, and that's all it is. That's all it is. Leave the guy the fuck alone, and you watch. Mark my word, he is going to pound this motherfucking indictment so far back up the FBI's ass, it's not even funny. Because I'm telling you, the guy didn't do it. I know he didn't do it. It's not him. It's just what people want you to fucking believe. And so, yeah. And in final, because I've gone way too long with this, because it pisses me off. Because Phil is a good fucking man. He is a good fucking man. He is a class act, a stand-up guy, an honest guy, a caring guy, and he busts his fucking ass. Do you know how many people in Philly I know have businesses and they bust their ass grinding their businesses all day long? But because of something they did when they were young, continues to fucking pinch at their backside. And you wonder why they're afraid to talk to anybody, because every time they do, it becomes a, he tried to shake me down. And that's what they do. And so in final, I know people are going to make an argument of, well, this person has a pass, that person's got a fucking pass, this guy's got a fucking pass. I don't give a fuck. I got a pass. So what does that mean? I got a pass, so naturally, if you hear a fucking rumor about me, I did it? How is that right in any fashion? And so I look forward to this trial coming because I think you're going to find out, and I think it's just going to be, another fucking Rubio fucking hand down. That's all this is. The guy's not credible in any sense of the fucking imagination. It's evidence built on bullshit. It's evidence based on somebody that probably shouldn't have said some certain things if he actually said those certain things to begin with. And so when the fucking the agreement comes forward of, look, it's notarized, we all signed that I was giving him a legitimate loan. Then what is the FBI going to do? Say that it's forged, it's not a real notary? I mean, like, where are they going to go from here? So it's another fucking Rubio hand down. This is what the FBI does. And if this is here's my thing, and I'm not saying nothing disparaging against Philip, but if this guy is a stone cold street gangster making millions and millions and millions, and this is the only thing they can seem to find to do, it's pretty pathetic. It's pretty pathetic. He didn't do it, and I will stand by that, what I just said. And I will stand by Phil in whatever happens, because I don't let people that have been good to me and people that are nice people in general take it in the ass. I just don't do it, and I never will. And that's just the truth at the end of the day. All right, so I will keep everybody informed on what's going on in that particular case. A lot of people have asked me if I'm going to go to the trial. Probably not. And the reason why is because it's a fucking joke. And you know what? I got no business being there. I really don't. I don't think me being there helps anybody, to be honest with you, because I'm as vocal against the FBI and the government and rats. I just think that me putting myself in that situation isn't going to be really helpful in that sense. And then there was also, and I got to say this, when Phil got arrested, I had given him a bunch of shirts that he never asked for. He never asked for these shirts. I did it because they're funny shirts. I don't own the company. It was another company. So I sent him a bunch of shirts without his knowledge. And you know, he was appreciative of it. You know, thanks a lot, you know, whatever. The FBI took photos of these fucking shirts when they arrested him. That's how fucking fucked up this situation is. You know, and everybody knows the shirts. Go to Omerta Mia. Every time I do an Omerta commercial and it comes on after the break, which it's about to now. The whole crux of it is, I don't own the shirts, so what? There's the taglines. It's like, stop glorifying rats. What the fuck is wrong with that? But the FBI takes pictures of those things like they're fucking evidence. He didn't ask for the fucking shirts. I did it out of the goodness of my heart. Do you know how many people I've given shirts to? Hundreds. So what? Now everybody's going to start getting indicted for wearing a fucking shirt? I hope to fucking God the FBI tries that fucking game with me. It's a fucking shirt. What was it, Rookie Day? What'd you get the greenhorn from the fucking FBI going, hey, look, we got these fucking shirts. This must mean something. Go fuck yourself. It's fucking nonsense. And so, no, I'm not saying I'm getting dragged into the bullshit, because it's bullshit. It's a fucking shirt. But if they try to play that game with me, go right the fuck ahead. We're going to have fun. Because I'm not going to fucking put up with it. I'm not. If I give somebody a fucking cigar, and let's say that cigar came over from Cuba, is the FBI going to cut it open, test the tobacco, go, oh, this is from Cuba, this is fucking not allowed in this country. Yeah, mafia. Is that what they're going to do? Because that's what it seems like to me. So do yourself a favor. Research. Look into it for yourself. Stop believing what journalists want you to think. Because a boring headline is, a guy didn't do anything. But if they can take a fucking indictment and wrap it and manipulate it and jerk off all over it to make it more palatable for you, that's what they're going to do. Headlines sell. They always have. They always will. And that's the bottom line. All right, so when we come back, we are going to get to your Q&A. In my travels, I'm always looking for a clothing brand that I feel like represents me. Anybody can go to a store and buy a t-shirt with a gimmick, but if you believe in 3 core values like I do, loyalty, honor, and respect, then look no further than Omerta Brand Clothing. You can catch them at omertamia.com, OMERTAMIA.com, with locations in Europe, California, Boston, Brooklyn, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Washington. They have a great clothing line with hats, shirts, sweatshirts, keychains, anything you might need, stickers. You want the rats to stop snitching, go right out and get yourself a sticker. But if you want to live your life by the gentleman's code, look no further than Omerta Brand Clothing. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. Really quick before we get to the Q&A, I wanted to talk about Charlie Carnesi for just a second. I really didn't know Charlie that well. He was supposed to help me out with something when I had a lawsuit going a while back, and he was going to do it for free, and it didn't work out. But the fact that he wanted to help for free really meant a lot to me. He didn't have to do it, and I actually sat with him a little bit when I was at the Joey Merlino trial, and he was nothing but a gentleman, a nice guy, and I've made a joke out of it saying that he had the softest snooze or snore of any man I've ever met. He was just a really good guy. He did a lot of things for a lot of people. Very well-respected an attorney, and he passed away, unfortunately. And I just wanted to say that when anybody fucking dies, it's tragic and it's sad. But when somebody like Charlie, who has impacted so many people's lives in a positive, it's a shame to see such a good person pass away. It happens, and life is short. But Charlie was a really good guy, and I was pretty upset when he died. But like I said, I didn't really know him all that well. I'm not going to pretend to know somebody I don't. But he was a really good guy, and we just wish his family and his friends the best. Tough time for a lot of people. A lot of people. All right. So with that, we're going to get to the Q&A. Once again, I preface it by saying that if I don't get to your question, there's reasons for it. Okay, now this first question is asked by a friend of mine, really good friend of mine who cracks me up nonstop, and he did ask me a huge question. So I'm not going to say his name out of respect for him, but I'm going to answer half your question. So I hope that's at least fair. All right, here we go. You hear a lot about the Neapolitan and Sicilian Mafia and 'Ndrangheta, but hardly anything about the Sacra Corona Unita operating in Puglia or Banda della Magliani in Rome. Could you possibly give us some info on these lesser-known Italian criminal organizations? Yes, I would love to do that. Unfortunately, I can only cover but so much, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Sacra Corona Unita for a second. It's been in existence since around 1981. They're located in France, Italy, Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, and the UK, and also the United States and Canada. According to law enforcement, they have a family with over 2,000 members spread out throughout the world. Originally, they were founded as the Nuova Grande Camorra Pugliese, which was then sort of run by Camorra boss Rafael Cutolo. The reason for the group was to expand operations into the Italian region of Apulia. After a few years, Cutolo has a downfall, and the group was taken over by Giuseppe Rigoli. And Rigoli these days is recognized as taking the group worldwide by working with 'Ndrangheta and Camorra, and then jumping into the olive oil and wine industries. They would evolve into gun running, narcotics, fraud, and would forge alliances with the Russian mafia, the Albanian mafia, the Colombian drug cartels, the Chinese triads, and even the Yakuza. And one of the things I want to preface really quick is a lot of organized crime in Italy is very different. You have the major groups, but then you have little splinter cells, as I like to call them, and they're very clannish in faction. I think I've done a bunch of articles about the stuff that goes on over there, so you can go over to our blog and check that out. But while traditional organized crime groups have a certain pecking order in the organizational chart, the SCU operated differently than the traditional mafia, or at least from what people in the United States sort of understand. For instance, new recruits would go through a 40-day prospecting period to ensure that they can commit crimes and to ensure that they have zero associations with the police. If you're found out to have an association with a cop in any way, fashion, or form, they kill you. A little bit different than it's run here. The second phase of prospecting, you become what's called a malevolenza, which was a worker. The second level, they're split into two different positions. The Lo Cigaro position was given if the prospect has killed at least 3 people, and if one is chosen for this, they cannot leave the mafia under penalty of death. A little bit different than it's run here. Another difference is that once a guy sort of becomes a made guy, he can really form his own crew without any inhibitions. The second position is the La Santa. In that position, is known for its induction ceremony. As they are indoctrinated into this particular group, they're given a cyanide pill, a gun, a lemon, and a needle. The cyanide represents shutting one's mouth and dying before betraying his brothers. The gun represents the method in which they will kill, and the lemon represents a healing implement for friends that get stabbed or shot. You put the lemon on the shot, and it fixes it, at least from this perspective. And the needle is used to prick the index finger of the prospect. So we see that the Sicilians use the gun, and they use the finger pricking, at least according to legend. The SCU has around 60 clans with over 2,000 members. Their specialty is extortion, arms dealing, narcotics, and smuggling. One of the biggest money makers for them is collecting a tax on the southeast coast of Italy. So for any group that lands on ship to the docks, they're going to take they're basically going to be extorted, and they're going to have to pay off, and these payoffs from other Italian and other criminal groups as well. So if you're a subgroup outside of the SCU, you're still going to pay a tax for coming into the country, at least that particular part of the country, and doing anything. They're also heavily involved in political corruption, and fringe groups of the SCU can be found in Chicago, New York, and in Florida, and they control every inch of their territory. So all that being said, if you want to look up more fringe groups like that, go ahead and look up Sacra Corona Unita, and you'll see a lot of different things. I don't have time to go into the other end of that group, but it's a very interesting read, and there's a big difference between how these groups operated. Okay. Who was the first made man in the outfit after Al Capone? First of all, Al Capone was never really made. A lot of people speculate that he was, but he really wasn't. Al Capone was a little bit different, and I've said this, and this is not in any way to invalidate who he was, but Al Capone was a street gangster. There's a big difference between like a mafioso and a street gangster. Al Capone was a gangster. He was highly inventive, highly intelligent in a million different ways, but he never really was a made man, even though he technically was on the first run of the commission. Very often these guys, especially Chicago, is very smart in this regard. They always send somebody else. They don't send the top guys to commission meetings. But Al Capone was really not a made guy. Now, for me to really tell you who the second made guy ever was, we sort of have to look at when they started inducting guys and sort of took the outfit and put it in another direction. And they really didn't start structurally organizing like that until 1931 with Frank Nitti. But it was really Paul Ricca who was the guy who changed how the outfit did things. He changed the induction ceremony because then there was one. In the old days, Capone would just hire anybody. You know what, let's join the group. If you can make money, you want to kill. And so there really wasn't that sort of design. Tony Accardo as well, Sam Giancana, Sam Battaglia, Felix Aldericio, Joe Iupa. These are guys that really sort of modeled the outfit in those days after what we see as the typical mafia. But like I said, back in the Capone days, it really wasn't like that. It's almost, if you go to the 1920s and 30s in New York, yeah, you had fringe guys and stuff like that, but in those days, only Sicilians, only Italians were getting made. So it's a little bit different in perspective. But from everything that I know, Al Capone was never, ever, 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 ever made. He was just a gangster, straight up street gangster. All right. Mad Dog Call versus Mad Dog Sullivan. For their respective eras, who was more crazy, more feared, more dangerous, more powerful, and the more prolific hitman? Ooh, this is a tough one. But in my opinion, I think Mad Dog Call was more dangerous and likely more prolific and more powerful. You have to understand, Mad Dog Call came up in a time where gangsterism was sort of newly forming, and you had the likes of Dutch Schultz, Lucky Luciano, and others. In fact, Call was born in Ireland, and pretty much from day one was in reform school by 12 years old. He had a tough childhood. His family emigrates to New York. 5 of his 6 siblings were dead before they were 12 years old. The Call family was just in deep, abject poverty. His father ended up taking off early on, and Call's mother would end up dying when he was young. And so basically he gets all left alone in New York as a child. And his last surviving 2 siblings tried to raise him, but his sister really couldn't help him the way. And the reason why I'm talking about that is to show you the sort of genesis of how he becomes who he becomes. He ends up getting tossed out of reform schools by 12. He was arrested for unlawful entry and sent to another reform school before being tossed out of that one. By 16, he'd be arrested for carrying a gun. By 23, he had been arrested over 25 times. But he really got his way into crime through Dutch Schultz, working as an armed guard for Schultz's illegal beer delivery trucks. Cole would be a ruthless enforcer for Schultz, and by 19 was whacking people for Dutch Schultz. In 1930, he formed his own crew and decided that he pretty much had enough of Schultz and pretty much took it to Schultz's ass. His last surviving brother, Peter, would end up getting killed by Dutch Schultz, and Vincent Call ended up going fucking crazy and kills 4 of Schultz's men in the process. Then he further pushes Schultz mentally into the brink of destruction by busting into his warehouse and destroying 120 vending machines, 10 trucks, and killed over 20 of Schultz's men. Cole would end up what really sort of destroys Cole in the end of the day is he does a drive-by shooting, attempting to kill Joe Rao, who was basically a Schultz underling who is basically hanging outside of a nightclub. With Tommy guns, Cole's crew ends up killing Rao, but they end up killing an innocent child in the process, which sort of enrages gangsters and the police. He would end up getting arrested but found not guilty. He was so feared that Salvatore Maranzano hired Cole to kill Lucky Luciano for $25,000. And at this point, once an innocent bystander was killed, Dutch Schultz had seen enough. It's got to stop. So he, along with Oni Madden, offered $50,000 to anybody that would kill Cole. And Schultz was even so enraged, he walked into the police station offering a house in Westchester to any cop who killed Cole. And so there's some major differences between how things ran in the day back to now. I don't think any gangster in their right mind is going to walk into a police station these days and say, I'll give a house to anybody who kills this prick. And eventually Cole ends up being shot weeks later while on a telephone at a phone booth, and police would end up removing 15 bullets from Cole's body. So I think the time period that Cole sort of came into made him the tougher and the more suspect of the bunch, to be honest with you. All right. If we take away prohibition, narcotics, and the gasoline tax scam, here we go with Francis again, and the Teamsters pension fund, outside of those 4 rackets, in your opinion, which is the mob's biggest racket? Well, first of all, the mob's biggest racket's always been narcotics, always will be. Second biggest racket was numbers, the numbers game. But of the ones that you mentioned, narcotics, gas tax scam, Teamsters pension fund, I think, in prohibition. I think probably of the bunch, narcotics and prohibition are the 2 biggest ones. The gas tax scam was big for its time. Pension fund was used for a lot of different reasons, but I think really narcotics and first of all, the prohibition set up the narcotics. Prohibition set up all these other rackets. So I think ultimately at the end of the day, I think prohibition, bootlegging, really was probably the mob's biggest racket in the history, but I think there have been other rackets that have come along, especially narcotics, that are just as big. All right. How respected were the old-time Philadelphia mobsters Joe Ida, Dominic Polina, and Marco Reginelli by the New York Commission? Well, here's the thing. Joe Ida essentially took off from Philadelphia, leaving the family to Angelo Bruno, so I don't know how much New York really would have respected a boss that took off and didn't want to continue being boss. I think there's a way to be a boss and then hand it to somebody else without running out and being afraid and fleeing to another country. Antonio Polina was a respected guy, but he had sort of a Scarfo issue, and anybody that sort of threatened his longevity, anybody that was a threat to who he was, he sort of kind of went Nicky Scarfo, and he even at one point wanted to kill Angelo Bruno. Bruno had very, very, very close ties to the commission, so when Polina hired his underboss, who was Ignazio Denaro, to kill him, Denaro ends up going to Bruno and telling Bruno, and the act actually saves Bruno's life, because if it had not been for Denaro, Bruno likely probably would have been killed. The commission, for whatever reason, was more beholden to Angelo Bruno than Polina, therefore they gave permission to Bruno to whack Polina, so I can't imagine that Polina really was that well-liked or respected, and some of that may be sort of directly related to him having sort of a Nicky Scarfo gene of anybody that sort of threatened him offhandedly was going to get killed, or at least threatened, and I think that the commission just didn't want to have that. Polina ends up getting word that Bruno got permission to kill him, and he ends up retiring. As far as Marco Reginelli, he was an earner for the pro-Bruno, the pre-Bruno Mafia. He pretty much ran gambling and had a huge numbers racket. He was also the underboss in Philadelphia and New Jersey. And he was really, what's interesting about him is he was responsible for funding the 500 Club, which would later become the Skinny D'Amato's Club in Atlantic City. And if you don't know who Skinny D'Amato was, you need to look him up. He was famous for launching the career of Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Martin and Lewis. Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis got their start at the 500 Club. It was really a destination for a lot of really, really terrific acts. But Bruno ends up actually succeeding Reginelli, so I think it's safe to say because he was an earner and he focused on making money, he was probably respected and thought highly of, but for some reason it seems like every which way you go with this, Bruno was the most respected of the bunch. All right, I know you say that Nicky Scarfo ruined the Philadelphia Mafia, but do you think Phil Testa should have gotten more blame for the promotion he gave Scarfo from soldier to third in command? And do you think Vincent the Chin should take some shit for backing Scarfo as boss? What's the real reason Scarfo killed Salvi Testa? Is Scarfo the most hot-headed mobster that ever became boss? I think he was. I think he was definitely the most hot-headed one. Killed guys. Look, this guy killed people if he dreamed that they were ratting. He killed guys if he thought that they were getting too much heat or they were getting too much attention. Then that's the reason why Salvi Testa was killed. I mean, I know the press likes to drag Joey Merlino into it and all this, and Joey Merlino's father into it, but I think the reality is, at the end of the day, is that Nicky Scarfo saw that Salvi Testa was sort of an up-and-comer, and he wasn't going to take it, wasn't going to put up with it. It was easier to remove the guy than to have anybody sort of, fight him for the throne, so to speak. But should Phil Testa take more blame? I don't think so, because you promote a guy because he can earn. You promote a guy because he's trustworthy. You promote a guy because he'll kill people, and you can't really blame Phil Testa for anything that Scarfo did. I think really the curse of this is Vincent the Chin, because Vinny the Chin is the one who puts him in charge, and then the minute all hell breaks loose, that's exactly what goes down. And all of a sudden now Vincent the Chin Gigante's got a huge problem on his hands because he's the one that allowed Scarfo to pretty much take over. But I think it's also worth noting that Scarfo was offered the boss position prior to Phil Testa taking it, and he declined for whatever the fucking reason might have been. I don't know what the reason would have been, but I think that, does Phil Testa take credit for that? No, and I don't think he should either, because I don't think that one guy should be held responsible for what happens, down the line. It is what it is. All right. Why do you think nobody ever tried to kill Joe Bonanno or his son after everything the other guys and the bosses would have been whacked for, considering they were lesser offenses? Other than Bonanno, did anyone ever try to kill Carlo Gambino, or was that just too suicidal to do? I'm sure, Bonanno obviously tried to kill Gambino, but that didn't get anywhere. Joe Colombo put a stop to that. All I know is that when Joe Bonanno was effectively shelved and he goes out to Arizona and him and his son get into that fucking scheme out in L.A. with the car dealerships and etc., I know that caused a real problem, because Joe Bonanno was warned to stay the fuck out of Racket, stay retired, and then he wrote the book, which created a lot more turmoil. I just think that at that point, a lot of the old bosses who would have been capable to pull something like that off just didn't. It wasn't worth it. It was too much heat for them. They figured the guy was persona non grata at that point. Him getting pinched for the car dealership scams and the stuff that his son was running out in L.A. and in Vegas and all of that. I think because it didn't affect anybody in New York, I think they just kind of let it. It was like a whitewash. I think they just let it go. Should they have killed him? Probably. But, I think that the mob at the time, they couldn't have, I think they tried. I think they were going to do it in the 60s, especially after they found out that he had pretty much wanted to kill Tommy Lucchese and Carlo Gambino and take over everything for himself. He probably should have been killed for that, but they didn't. They let it go. And I think just as time moves on and some of these old-timers died, I think just nobody thought it was fucking worth it. All right, besides Carlo Gambino, how respected or feared was Angelo Bruno with the East Coast bosses? I don't think he was feared, and I know a lot of people are going to say that he was. Look, he was called the Docile Don for a reason. He didn't like to kill guys. He sort of wanted to delegate things by being concerned and trying to be a negotiator. But here's the thing, and I've said this, and this is what's going to point to this, is that obviously the commission was infuriated when he was killed. I happen to believe that Vincent the Chin was in on that. I've always believed that was the case. But his own men were strangled. His own men were poor. His own men couldn't sell drugs in Philadelphia, but then he was beholden to the Gambinos and allowed them to do it, the Cherry Hill Gambinos anyway, to pretty much move in and sell narcotics. So how can you as a boss tell your guys they can't earn, and then you're going to allow another family to come right in and do what they want? So I think that from the commission aspect of that, or from at least other bosses, I'm sure Vinny the Chin respected him. Obviously, I think Gambino probably likely would have, because he allowed them to function there and he allowed them to make money there. But I think that the overall past Gigante and Gambino, probably not a whole lot. I don't think anybody put the fear of God. But it's sort of how he directed himself, how he did business. He was respected, but feared is a whole nother thing. I just don't think that when your own men especially can't earn, and you're telling them they can't do this, but you're allowing other crime families to do it, it sort of makes you a hypocrite in a lot of ways, and it sort of makes you beholden to another boss. And if you're beholden to anybody else, that sort of doesn't make you a feared guy. Maybe it makes you feared through your extensions of knowing other people. But I just don't see it that way. I think there's been other guys in Philadelphia that absolutely were feared, more so than Bruno. All right. Michael Cohen has more or less just ratted out Donald Trump. Your thoughts? I don't talk about politics for a good reason. But I will tell you this, and it's a very simple answer. A rat is a rat is a rat. Michael Cohen didn't mind getting paid for fucking 10 years by Donald Trump to do whatever Donald Trump needed him to do. Hush money, all this crazy shit that they're talking about, I could care less about it. But when you work for somebody for 10 years, if they're a scumbag, you know it, but you have no problem cashing them checks. So it's a rat move. It's a rat move to save himself. And I know a lot of people are going to have different opinions on it, but I'm talking about this from a perspective of you just don't tell on your friends. And that's exactly what he did. So as a rat is a rat is a rat. All right. Do you think Joey Massino would have gone down as one of the greatest mob bosses ever had he had the same clout, and have the same clout as other greats if he didn't rat? He did some amazing shit until he folded and put guys away. I agree. I think Joey Massino was an innovator in a lot of different ways. I honestly do think that had he not gone the way he went, I think he would have been insanely powerful. I think he would have put the Bonanos back on the map in a lot of different ways. But ultimately, we're never really going to know. We can't make an argument if he's going to go down as one of the greatest mob bosses in history because he's a fucking rat. He ratted everybody else. Had he not done that, who knows what could have happened, but I think that he had put himself in a position where he was, first of all, he was an incredibly smart guy, a genius guy in a million different ways. But I think that it's a situation that he didn't want to do a lot of time, and it was easier to rat on everybody. But I think had he not done that, I don't think it would have mattered much because he would have been in prison. He gets indicted, which the indictment leads to the ratting shit, testifying against people. So, it's hard to argue that because if he gets indicted, he automatically becomes a rat because he gets indicted and gets convicted. So there you go. I don't think we can logistically argue that because of the way it all went down. But had he never gotten indicted, first of all, we have to look at the three capo hit too. He had to do what he had to do, but he ends up fucking the Rizzutos in the ass on that one. Totally fucking up the relationship between the Bonanos and Canada, which was Joe Bonanno's real strong point. And that's where a lot of Joe Bonanno's power did come from, was family associations outside of New York. So, he was more detrimental in that respect. But I think that if none of those things kind of happen, there's no telling. No telling. Do you think the Genovese crime family should still be named the Luciano crime family? 100% absolutely yes. Listen, and that may offend some people, but I think that if you're going to show honor and homage to somebody that really created what it is, it should have always been the Luciano crime family, never the Costello crime family, never the Genovese crime family. I think while the standard seems to be one thing, I agree. I think Luciano's name should have always been there. I think it should still be there. But you know what? Vito Genovese was an egomaniac and a nut job, and that's what he wanted. That's what he got. But I think that's just how it is. All right. Paul Rico was a powerful guy, but rarely mentioned. Why do you think that is? It's not because people don't know things. I mean, there's information out there about him. I think that it's like I said earlier with anything, right? You have to make headlines. If he had killed 55 people and bludgeoned people to death and dismembered bodies, he'd be everywhere. But I think that when you're relatively a quiet guy, you're relatively sort of, you lead by staying in the shadows, you don't get as much press. Look at Russell Buffalino, for example. Doesn't really get a whole lot of credibility anywhere on the internet or social media or in books. But the reality is he was a very strong, powerful guy. But because he wasn't out in the open like a John Gotti or some of these others, that's exactly why. He's not flashy. He's not, journalists and book writers don't get enough from that. But, that was a smart way to live. Stay in the shadows, do your thing, and hopefully, God willing, you die in your bed and not in a cell. And that's why he's not mentioned a lot. And also, it probably has to do with Tony Accardo and at the time they were splitting sort of duties. And Tony Accardo, definitely, forget about it, huge guy. And I think that Paul Ricca sort of gets overshadowed by that sometimes. And we can argue whether that's fair or not, but I think that's likely the reason why. Okay, this question is absolutely insane. All right, name top 3 rats that if you could get away with whacking, hypothetically, who would they be, in any order, and how would you whack them? All right, the first and foremost, Joe Valachi's got to go, and the reason why he is, because he's really the first guy that kind of comes out and spills the beans. Not that the mafia wasn't known, they were, but it put J. Edgar Hoover in a situation where he had to finally acknowledge it. And the minute that he has to acknowledge it, the floodgates open and the rest is sort of history, and I would have strangled the fuck out of that guy. The second has to be Salvatore Gravano. And that guy was, first of all, he's the biggest fucking liar I've ever met. Capable guy, earner, deadly guy, but once again, a lot of his motivation for doing a lot of stuff was to steal businesses. That's not gangster. That's just sort of pathetic. Granted, that's how it is. And I would have ended up shooting him right in his fucking face in broad daylight, and I'd drop his body off in front of his house with a rat crammed in his fucking mouth and a dollar bill sticking out of his ass. The third one, Philip Narducci, I can't fucking stand that guy. With him, I would have shot him, dismembered him, and fed him to sharks in the Atlantic Ocean. Or, to make it even better, I get him on a boat, put him in a shark cage, and sink that motherfucker and let him drown. Guy's a pile of shit, a fucking liar, a scumbag, completely nutty. If you have never seen Philip Narducci's 60 Minutes interview, it's so hilarious. He's wearing the fucking Frank Vincent rat fucking wig. Just absolutely fucking nut job idiot who was only as powerful because of his uncle. He makes a half-assed argument of, well, it was my uncle, I was going to do what I got to do. Without his uncle, believe me, I don't think anybody in their right mind would have been shaken in their fucking boots. But his uncle, obviously Nicky Scarfo, had a fucking reputation, and I think Philip Narducci in his own right had a reputation as well. But he's a rat scumbag fuck, so fuck him. All right, we all know that everybody wanted Neil Delacroix as boss, but who do you think the commission wanted, Big Paul or Neil? I think there were certain guys within the Gambinos that did want Neil Delacroix as boss, but that was not universal in the crime family. That was that was pretty much Gotti's crew. They wanted Neil as boss, but I don't think that was universal amongst the Gambino crime family, because there was a split after Paul got whacked, and there were a lot of people that were upset within the family, but they just had to accept it. But there are those that have spoken out against it. And I don't think necessarily, you have to look at the commission at the time. Paul was pretty much the leader of the commission at that point. So, it didn't matter what any other bosses wanted. This was Paul's crime family, and he had support of Vinny the Chin Gigante and other people. So I think that the only people that really wanted Neil Delacroix as boss after Gambino dies, really, who didn't want that was the Gotti crew. That's the reality of it. I don't think that was the overall consensus of the Gambinos at the time. All right, here we go. I'm from San Francisco. Any mob activity there? There actually was for a long time. The Lanza crime family operated out of San Francisco from about 1928 till around 2016. Francesco Lanza took over after whacking Luigi Malvise in 1932, and he really became the first mob boss in San Francisco. He did everything from loan sharking, pimping, extortion, numbers, gambling, and even founded the famous Fisherman's Wharf, which a lot of people may not know. Anthony Lima would end up taking over for him in 1937, And then Francesco's son, James Lanza, would end up taking over the family from about 1961 to 2006 and pretty much takes them to a new level. One of the things that Lanza realized was that a big mob family meant too many eyes, too many ears, and after Joe Valachi pretty much ratted out the entire mafia, he sort of wanted to keep the family small and isolated, which is exactly why the Lanza crime family did not open up the books very often at all. That's why a lot of their members were very old. They just didn't believe in having a massive family. He ended up aligning himself with the Genoveses. Joe Savello from Dallas, Joe Cerrito from San Jose, they were all very tight together. And it was Lanza who pretty much not told, but they gave the Patriarca crime family the okay for Joe Barboza to get hit in their territory. I don't know if Ray Patriarca necessarily needed permission, but it was sort of like one of these things, well, we're going to hit somebody because he's a rat and a piece of shit scumbag, and we don't want to bring heat to your area, but they were told it was okay. The Lanza said, go right ahead, not a problem. And as the 1980s sort of come, it becomes about narcotics, and the San Francisco family really couldn't stay off the radar. The minute they get involved in narcotics, it creates a lot of problems. It led to a lot of arrests and a lot of indictments, and it pretty much all but eradicated what was left of the Lanza family in and of itself. What I can tell you is that there are some small factions there, Sicilian clans that are in operation. Some Chicago-made guys are out there as well as Lucchese guys, as well as Gambinos. The problem per se that they're a crime family is sort of a misnomer. They've got a bunch of, I wouldn't say independent operators, but they've got a lot of made guys out there that are doing things. But to say that it's under one big mob family umbrella isn't really the case. Believe it or not, John Gotti actually expanded into San Francisco and established associates out there in San Francisco as well. But the bigger groups, obviously, in that area particularly, are the Yakuza and the Triad Dragons. All right. Any info on Al Pajamas from Philadelphia? Vincent Pagano, listen, he was a bit player in Philadelphia, sort of an egomaniac. Thought he was probably a lot bigger than he really was. It really wasn't until John Stanfa took over that Pagano was recognized. He ends up getting made a captain under Stanfa, and the reality is that probably never would have happened without Stanfa. And he really sort of becomes one of Stanfa's top advisors, but that really doesn't say a whole hell of a lot considering that Stanfa ends up making John Vesey and allowed Ron Previty to sort of come into the fold. Pagano was a bad shooter too. He couldn't shoot straight. You know what I mean? So it was really Pagano and Stanfa's underboss, Frank Martinez, who tried to kill John Vesey above the butcher shop in South Philly. Weeks prior, Vesey had actually signed a cooperation agreement with the FBI and was shot 3 times in the head and stabbed once in the chest and somehow fucking lived. Pagano really kind of came up under Frank Sindone and his crew. He gave himself his own nickname of Al Pajamas in reference to his bedroom attire and was a self-proclaimed representative for putting people to sleep. When you have to make up your own nickname and you have to sort of put it out on the streets so you put people to sleep, you're making yourself out to be probably something a little bit more than you are. I didn't know the guy, so I can't tell you certifiably for 100%. I can just tell you what I've kind of heard. But once Sindone gets hit, Pagano sort of disappears a little bit. It wasn't really seen on the street a whole lot in the 80s, would end up getting pinched for narcotics and would end up running down to Florida. And when Stanfa begins his rise, Pagano ends up coming out of hiding, and when he gets back in Philadelphia, he lets everybody know on the streets. All of Philadelphia knows Al Pajamas is back. So he thinks he's... I don't know how to describe it, but if you have to preface who you are and you're back in Philly, you're probably not the guy that you believe that you really are. But that was very short-lived, and he would end up spending most of his time at that point in jail. And he ends up getting indicted with John Stanfa in 94, and rumor has it that Stanfa was going to promote him to consigliere at the time. I don't know how much I really buy that. John Stanfa did a lot of shit that was really fucking lopsided. Just the fact that Ron Previty even was allowed to go near anybody after being a cop just stinks. Stanfa did a lot of making John Vesey of all fucking people. So he did a lot of weird fucking shit, John Stanfa, and he ends up paying for it in the end. He made the mistake of taking on the young guys, and the young guys took it to his ass, and the rest is fucking history. All right, wondering if Vince McMahon was a mobster. He has money. Bodies turn up under his watch. he may or may not had a beef with. We already know that he was basically having to pay off the mob in Madison Square Garden along the way. Any thoughts? I don't know a lot about Vince McMahon, and it turns out, and I'm waiting still. If you don't know who Jim Cornette is, Jim Cornette was the manager of the Midnight Express and NWA, managed a lot of terrific acts. He actually does have his own podcast. I have actually reached out. I've gotten a lot of calls and messages on this particular question. I think the reality is there's no way that Vince McMahon Sr. or Vince McMahon Jr., if you don't know who they are, they run the WWE, WWF. I don't think there's any way they didn't pay off the mafia. You can't go into a territory like New York and not bribe and not pay off to get what you want. Whether or not that still takes place today, I couldn't really tell you. But like I said, I reached out to Jim Cornette to find out if he can, because he is a wrestling historian. He was in the wrestling business a long time. He still is. He's got a great podcast, by the way. I am a Cult of Cornette fan. I love listening to his podcast because he cracks me up. And he says what he wants to say. I'm not a huge wrestling fan, but I enjoy his podcast. And I have reached out to him, asking him to give me some biographical stuff that he may or may not know about the mob and wrestling in its day, be it the 70s, the 80s, the 60s. I know that Bruno Sammartino was a big mob guy, had a lot of contacts. Captain Lou Albano, same sort of deal there. Dino Bravo, obviously, we know got whacked by the Rizzutos. So, it is what it is. And once Jim Cornette gets back to me, I'll definitely expound on that question even more. Okay, what relationships did the Sicilian Mafia have with the Medellin drug cartel? To my knowledge, look, the biggest thing the Mafia ever had to do with the Medellin was through Pablo Escobar. The Sicilian Mafia, really what they did, what the relationship was with Escobar is they taught Escobar how to conduct military exercises. Listen, Escobar killed politicians. And Escobar didn't know how to. He knew how to use violence to get what he wanted, but he needed it on an epic scale. And so he went to the Sicilians asking them how to train him to execute these types of things. So they end up advising him on how to do military strategies, how to use bombs, etc. And the Sicilians, believe it or not, had interests in nearby areas, including Venezuela, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, and into the Far East. And used Vito Palazzo from Palermo to orchestrate those friendships. There was also a deal to pretty much flood Europe through Colombia with cocaine. The problem is the Colombians did not have a network into Europe. Their go-to in that was the Sicilian Mafia. If you take the murder of Justice Giovanni Falcone, whom both the Italians wanted dead for a lot of different reasons, the Colombians also wanted him dead because he had pretty much ended up seizing over 600 pounds of cocaine, which was Colombia to Italy, which was proving that the Sicilian Mafia had inroads into Colombia and that there was a narcotics distribution. So to simply state it, the Sicilians were ordering cocaine for a cheaper rate than they could actually get from the East, and that's why the coke was coming up from Colombia into Italy. And then Italy would in turn turn around and then send it to the United States. So there's a lot of networking going on, but it was actually cheaper to import coke from Colombia than Afghanistan at the time. And the other thing that ties them is that Colombia did not, like I said earlier, have a distribution network in Europe, and the Mafia did, and that's what really sort of binds them. There's a guy by the name of Roberto Panuzzi, who really was the front man from the Sicilian Mafia to the cartels. Look him up. It's Roberto Panuzzi, Pannunzi. He ended up covering the Colombian angle for Ndrangheta and the Sicilians along with the Colombians. So he basically was the equivalent of the Italian version of Pablo Escobar, and he's still doing it. At least according to the DEA and articles that I was able to actually sign up. Okay, how about a background on Alan Dorfman, the Teamsters money man in Vegas? I would love to answer that, but that is such a big show. That is going to be a show even of itself. Okay, what is the mob in 2020? Broke, washed up, or still striving? Are you kidding me? The mob is still active. They always will be. You're never going to kill the mob. Numbers are growing. Numbers are getting bigger. A lot of that has to do with the fact that federal government money was used more or less after 9/11 for anti-terrorism and stuff like that, and it allowed groups to obviously grow. They're still striving. in some certain instances, they're as big as they were in the 80s, depending on who you talk to and who you believe. All right. How powerful was Benny Squint Lombardo? Was he officially the boss of the Genoveses before Vinny the Chin? Philip Lombardo, he was definitely a powerful guy. A lot of people forget that he came up with Trigger Mike Coppola in the 116th Street crew in East Harlem. But there is a bit of a disagreement that has come up about his boss status while Genovese was in prison. Genovese installs a ruling panel that consisted of Mike Miranda, Jerry Catania, and Tommy Eboli. And it was Joe Valachi in 62 who says that Lombardo was also on that panel, but I'm not sure how much we can really believe that. How many fucking guys do you need on a ruling panel, right? Ultimately, it would be Carlo Gambino who orchestrated the hit on Tommy Eboli in order to put Frank Thierry in charge, but it was another informant, Vincent the Fish Cafaro, who said that Lombardo had actually been boss from 69 and was using Eboli as a front boss. So I don't really know what to believe. But here's the thing: why does anybody need to kill Eboli if he's a front boss? That makes like a shit sandwich out of everything that's going on. So I don't really know if I believe it, because I don't think there would have been any justification, even if he wanted to put Funzi Thierry at the top. There's no reason to kill Eboli, considering that you have a front boss system. So in a sense, I mean, the Genoveses were already using a front boss structure anyway. So the information lends itself to, for, and against. Was he the boss? I don't think so. I really don't think he was. I think that they used a front boss structure. I just, was he a member of that ruling panel, four guys? Maybe he was. I don't know. I wasn't there. But I think to say that he was out and out the boss is absolute bullshit. And we can't believe anything Cafaro says anyway. All right. Was Murder, Inc. directly attached to the Mangano crime family because of Anastasia, or totally separate? Totally separate. Anastasia didn't need to use Murder, Inc. for anything he did. He had his own people for that. So totally separate. Yes or no, which boss of a small family could run a New York family or the Chicago outfit? And your reasons why. Ray Patriarca, Nicky Scarfo, Frank Ballesteri, Angelo Bruno, Stefano Magaddino, or Joe Zerilli. For my money, of those bunch, Joe Zerilli and Ray Patriarca, and the reason why is Patriarca had a small family to begin with, but he was ruthless, well-respected on the commission, and he could fucking organize shit. Very intelligent guy, very dangerous guy, very well-respected guy. Bruno had his ups and downs, obviously, with not letting his guys earn. Frank Ballesteri absolutely could have, but I don't think he was as powerful enough. Nicky Scarfo, forget it. Stefano Magaddino, forget it. No way. Joe Zerilli, absolutely. He's another guy that was very well respected. A lot of things are not known about him. I mean, there's a lot that's public, but I think of those group, those are the two. All right. Is there or was there a mob family in Iowa? Yeah, there was. They're no longer there, but originally Al Capone ends up putting Charlie Cherry Nose Gioia in charge of Des Moines, Iowa. The reason was because Des Moines at the time was sort of like the American middle road, crossroads of freight, long-distance hauling with trucks. It especially became important during the times of Prohibition, and it was a way station for them to transport and move illegal booze. But ultimately, Lou Fratto would end up taking over for Charlie after Charlie asked Chicago for permission to go out to California and get involved in the movie industry. Paul Ricca and Anthony Accardo gave the position to Fratto, and Lou would end up taking over, bringing his own guys in. But here's something weird about Lou Fratto that a lot of people don't know. He despised Italians. He was Italian, but he didn't like his own people. He didn't like working with Italians. He didn't like associating with them. And what he preferred was Jewish gangsters over his Italian counterparts. And so he brought in a lot of Jewish guys to help him run his business. So yes, Iowa did have the mob. Today, forget about it. If Big Paul moved on Gotti and his crew first, do you think the Gambinos would still be as strong as they were in this day and age? Okay. What do they say? Bombshell. The Gambinos are as strong as they ever were today. Listen, Big Paul getting clipped in the Gotti reign. All right, so you have a period of 10 or 15 years where things are bad. The Gambinos are as big as they ever were. They are as strong as they ever were. It's hard to compare and contrast decades, but I don't think Big Paul, his demise and Gotti reign might have set them back a little bit, but believe me when I tell you, they are as strong as they've ever been. All right, your podcast and radio shows are great. Are there any podcasts that you listen to on a regular basis? I don't listen to a lot of crime podcasts, I'll be completely honest with you. Just kind of not my thing. But I do listen to Jim Cornette, the Jim Cornette Drive-Thru, The Cult of Cornette. I listen to a lot of his stuff, and I like listening to Joe Rogan, Joey Diaz as well, but I have some issues with Joey Diaz just for his stance on rats. I think he talks out of his ass sometimes, to be honest with you, and I don't think he knows exactly what he's talking about, but he's an entertaining guy, hilarious comedian, so I don't mind listening to it. But Joe Rogan is probably at the top of the shows that I listen to, except for when he has that fucking nut job, Alex Jones, on. Ugh, I don't understand how anybody can believe that fucking zipperhead, but it is what it is. But those are pretty much what I do listen to. All right, social media being the way it is, and also with rumors being what they are, how do you separate fact from fiction when you're talking about certain criminal groups? Well, the first answer to that is I don't listen to journalists. I investigate myself. I look up information for myself. And there's a big difference between rumors and what is actually factual. Looking at indictments, reading court testimony and stuff. There's more evidence in that, factual stuff in that, than there is listening to two pinheads walking through the woods holding hands. All right. Also, I've come across some really funny rumors about you, and it seems like it's the same bunch that's always spewing nonsense about you. What I want to know is, I know it can be hard to hear that type of shit all the time. How do you deal with it? It's easy for everyone to say just ignore it, but I know at times you don't. How do you decide what you're going to address and what not to address? All right, I'll be honest. I try to ignore all of it all the time, but I can't. I don't like shit talkers. I don't like gossip people. I don't like people that like to say bad shit about me, because I'm going to tell you the truth. 99% of the people that do won't say it to my face, but that's reality in life, right? I have not handled it always the way that I should have. You have to ignore it, because what people often want, and this goes back to childhood, the bully picking on you at the fucking playground or whatever. They don't, for whatever reason, bullies don't have, they weren't treated well as kids. So what do? They react to how they were treated, and they do bad shit because they want attention. The same thing with these nut jobs and social media. They want attention from you. And here's the thing. They listen to my show, and I know that's the case because they'll use things I say on my show to try to poke me. And they make up the wildest fucking rumors all the time. And listen, where I really try to draw the line is when you attack my family. You don't have to like me. You don't have to like what I do. The minute you attack kids, you attack my family, who's got nothing to do with what I do. That's where I sort of draw the line. That's where I lose my shit. And I got to admit, I got to be better about that. I can't take on the fucking world. All I can really say is that there's always going to be people that say shit and invent shit because it makes them feel important, and it makes them feel good at the end of the day to know that they upset me. And I can't give them that satisfaction. So I'm a big man. I can admit it. I can handle it a lot better some days. But usually where I draw the line is with my family. But then again, guess what? They don't know me. They don't know my family. They don't know anybody I'm around, anybody I'm friends with. So the reality is I got to get better at that. And then that's the truth. I can admit that. But I try not to give them any validity just because that's what they want. Ultimately, at the end of the day, and how pathetic do you have to be sitting at home when you're 35 years old in your mother's basement, fucking attacking me on social media? Like, what does that do for you? He's upset. So it is what it is, and I just try to ignore it as much as I can. I hear nonsense everywhere. I went to Philly and heard nonsense the other night I couldn't fucking believe. It's nonsense. People will read a headline and then all of a sudden make it out to be true, and it's like, come on. And so I think that for generality's sake, I think you just got to ignore people. People hate anybody being successful. It's because they're not doing what they want to do with their life, and they're miserable, and they're going to make everybody around them fucking miserable, and that's just the truth. All right. I noticed on one of your pages you made some sort of reference to not taking photos with people who are alleged gangsters. In my opinion, I know why you don't, but there will be those who say it's because you really don't know anybody. I know you do, but I think anybody who listens to you knows you're getting information that nobody is reporting on. And I know you broke the Philip Narducci story. You broke the story on him getting out on bail. So obviously you do know people. Why do you think everybody is so out to get you? First of all, look, people can say, I don't know this person, I don't know that person, and I don't give a fuck what anybody thinks. I don't make claims on my show that if I know somebody, I do. So, in other words, if I say I know this person and you went to them and said, do you know that guy? They're going to tell you yes. They're not going to say, no, I never heard of him. They're not going to do that. So I don't really particularly care what people believe and what not. In most cases, believe it or not, let the truth be told, it benefits me more when people don't believe me. It really does, because then I don't get caught up in this nonsense like T-shirt bullshit. You see what I'm saying? So in some ways it does help, but I don't get off on knowing anybody. That's not what I'm about, and I think anybody that listens to my show knows this, and I'm not going to get on a rabbit hole here because I really could. Who you know, like I said earlier, doesn't define you. Just because I know somebody and they do what they do has no reflection on my life. I can meet the most infamous of people, and I have. And I don't give what they do 9 to 5 when I'm not around them. I don't give a fuck about. That's their business. I don't ask them about that. We talk about sports. We talk about politics. We talk about whatever. It's not geared on. So in 1974, you shot a guy in the back of the fucking head 9 times. What'd that feel like? That's not the kind of guy I am. That's not the way I am. And that's why I think that anyone who is an alleged this or an alleged that, that's why they talk to me, because they know I'm not going to repeat shit. They know that I'm not getting my dick hard, for lack of better terms. My dick doesn't get hard hanging out with them. It doesn't do anything for me. It's like if a guy has a nickname, The Sandwich, I don't know The Sandwich. I know the guy by his given fucking name. I know him on a different, like a personal level. And that leads me to one other thing I want to say about that, and then I'll move on to the next question, is that there are people on social media who I keep saying that they know somebody that I know and they don't. That has to stop. And the reason why that has to stop is because they're looking for me to sort of back up their bullshit that they know people and they don't. Shaking hands with somebody in a bar doesn't constitute you knowing them. All right. So my thing is, there's these people, and it's not all of them, but there are a lot of people on social media who, I don't know what it is, but it's like they are so enamored with anybody that's ever been called a gangster that they look at them like they're fucking Robert De Niro or John Belushi or Dan Aykroyd or whoever the fuck it may be. Kenny Rogers. What the fuck? Fuck Kenny Rogers. I can't stand that Kenny Rogers. Don't get me started on Kenny Rogers. It's funny, my mother once told me, she goes, your father's favorite song was The Gambler by Kenny Rogers. My mother must be fucking nuts. She must have been fucking nuts. My father didn't know who Kenny Rogers was. Are you fucking kidding me? Just go. That's a weird thing, but that's something else altogether. I don't know why Kenny Rogers is in my mind today. But there are people online that think that a good reference would be, as someone said to me, I'm thinking of going to the Joey Merlino trial. Do you think he'll autograph my notebook? Like, what the fuck? Like, do you people understand that these are normal 9 to 5 guys who only seem abnormal because of what the newspapers print? Do you think that, and I don't want to mention names, but do you think that, let's just invent a name, Benny Craps. Let's say you meet Benny Craps, and the newspaper allege he's a wise guy and he's whacked 10 people. Do you really think sitting next to him is going to make you feel special? Like at the end of the day, he says, oh, what's your name, John? Hey, John, how are you? Good to meet you. And all of a sudden you think you're friends and you run off telling everybody you know people. And it's like, I see this on social media on a really weird level. Listen, no matter what, I've met a lot of famous people in my life. I've met a lot of gangsters in my life, and they're all 9 to 5 guys. They're normal. But you look at them from the viewpoint of a movie or what the films have said this is. And that's the thing. And listen, you're in your right to believe and like people for what you want, but I don't think, and here's the transverse backdrop of that, is then these people write these guys in prison, and after a month they're shitting fucking razors because they're scared to death that like Tommy Patera is going to get out and come to their house and butcher them like fucking Michael Myers on Halloween night. Don't write these guys. You don't know. First of all, you don't understand the life. You don't understand them. And you're fine with it because you get a letter from Tommy Patera or Anthony Center or any of these other fucking guys. And you're like, ooh, look, I'm somebody. I got a letter from this person. But then when the motherfucker gets mad at you and says some crazy shit, you automatically want to sell your fucking house and move to Idaho. And you get petrified. Leave it alone. Enjoy the books, enjoy the nostalgia, enjoy the movies, but don't get involved. Don't get involved unless you're fully and 100% willing to know what comes with it. And that's the truth. That's the truth. All right. 2 more questions. I recently heard a story from someone that you went out of your way to help somebody who's having a really hard time, and that you've gone out of your way to help a lot of your listeners. I don't want to go into what I heard just because I believe good deeds should always be kept silent. I just feel like people should know that you have silently helped a lot of people, and you should get some credit for not being what so many people are trying to allege about you. Kudos. Listen, it's like anything in life, right? When I was growing up as a kid, I didn't struggle. My parents were blue-collar people. They had money. It wasn't... They worked hard for what they got. And, my father would put money in my pocket if I was going here, going there. And if I saw somebody was homeless, I'd pull right out of my pocket and give it to him. That's the way I've always been. I'm a humble guy. I've always been like that. Anybody that I might have helped, I don't do it for accolades. I never have and I never will, and I'm not even going to talk about any of that. I don't believe that, first of all, anybody that has to tell you that they help people is looking for an accolade, and I don't look for accolades. So anything that I might have done along the way to help anybody was out of the goodness of my heart and because I care about people. And I think what you will find is if you stop listening to the gossip mongers and the fucking morons on fucking social media, and if you actually walked up and met me in person, you'd be a little shocked. And I know for a fact, a lot of people, that's the first thing they say to me after 20 minutes of meeting me is, wow, you're not what I thought you'd be. Well, it is what it is. And that's why we can't stereotype people. Because what you may think I am, I may not be. What you may not think I am, I actually might be. So, listen, anything I do for anybody else out of the good-natured being of my heart, and I like to help people. And listen, we all struggle, right? We all have hard times. And if there's something that I can do to help anybody, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, but I'm also not a fucking sucker either. There's a lot of suckers out there and a lot of people who will, you help them once and they ask you repeatedly every 2 weeks for something else. So you just, you never say no. You always help if you can, but the one thing, and I swear to God, this is the absolute truth, don't ever put yourself in a position where you're going to get fucked. And what I mean by that is, listen, somebody needs help, somebody needs a little money, whatever, you do it once, but you also don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to be hurting. If you can do it and it's not going to affect your pocket, your bills, your food, your stomach, whatever, then go ahead and do it. But don't put yourself so far out where you're hurting. And because reality is when I give somebody something, I don't give a fuck if they tell me a million times, next week I'll get you. That goes in my ear and right out my ass immediately. I don't care, because if I do it, it's not that I'm having like a negative expectation that you're not going to repay the favor. I just do it because you need something. You came to me. That's it. Done deal. If I never get a dime back, I really don't give a fuck. I really don't at the end of the day. It doesn't. It's just so. My point is that anybody I may have helped, anything I might have done, I honestly don't know who's saying what, but I'm just not going to talk about it. There's no point to it. I just do what I do, and that's it. All right. Did Santos Trafficante run Miami? Absolutely he did. Would the cartels ask him for permission to operate there and would he receive portions of their profits? Well, you got to really look at when the cartels came in, and that was like right around the 80s. Trafficante crime family was pretty much at that point, I'm not saying going downhill, but that was pretty much over with for Santo Jr. at the time. So especially there's a documentary, Cocaine Cowboys 1 and 2, which sort of talks about Griselda Blanco and the cartels coming into Florida and the huge shootouts that they had there. But reality is, had he still been relatively young, I think they absolutely would have had to. But then again, who's going to take on the Colombians at that point? I think history has shown us what cartels have done in Florida, and I don't think that they were going to back down to anybody. Like in the case of Roy DeMeo, when they thought the cartels were going to come here and blow everything up, the mob guys, they didn't get scared. They just didn't want any problems. Especially when Chris Rosenberg did what he did and robbed 2 Colombian drug dealers. It was crazy shit that happened. So, while he ran Miami for his time period, you moved to like 1982, 1983 when this Colombian Cocaine Cowboy shit started. I don't think there was very much that Santos Trafficante could have done, to be honest with you. What's the whole entire mafia going to launch a war against the Colombians? It's just not going to happen. So I think that while he did run Florida, I don't think the cartels asked him for permission to do a goddamn thing. They just did what they wanted. And that's the reality of it. Plus, the time period when all of that kind of started, this wasn't going on. The cartels wasn't, while it was sort of going on in the 60s and 50s, if we're going to talk about that time period, then absolutely there was permission that was granted for that. But if you're moving towards like 1980, forget it. Forget it. All right, so all that being said, those are your questions. You can reach out to me on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Submit your questions in a private message. Tag me, tweet me. Go over to Facebook and type in Mob Talk Radio. Send me a private message there. Or you can put your question underneath the post on Mob Talk Radio of Q&A. We are going to take a short break. When we get back, we are going to get to Johnny Dio. Stay tuned on Mob Talk Radio. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are going to be talking about Johnny Dio. I prefaced it by saying, and the reason why I did is because Jimmy Hoffa really doesn't get, he would probably have gotten close to where we got, but if it hadn't have been for Johnny Dio, the likelihood is, well, you know, let's do the show and you guys let me know. All right. Johnny Dioguardi was born on April 29th of 1914 on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And he grew up off Forsyth Street, which is basically rooted in Little Italy. He had two brothers, Thomas and Frankie. His father, Giovanni, would be whacked in August of 1930, which at the time police called a mafia hit. Johnny's uncle, who went by the moniker of Jimmy Doyle, whose real name was Giacomo Plumeri, was a member of a gang run by Albert Martinelli and his friend Lucky Luciano. By age 15, Johnny's uncle introduced him to organized crime. At this period of time, and the garment district was controlled by both Lucky Luciano and Thomas Gagliano, who at the time was the head of the Lucchese crime family. Johnny and his uncle Giovanni and his brother Tommy were moonlighting for both Luciano and Gagliano. Johnny was close to Louis Lepke Buckhalter and Jacob Shapiro. Shapiro was Buckhalter's muscle, and the two were proficient in the labor rackets at the time. Johnny, along with his uncle and another mobster by the name of Dominic Dodato, had established and ran a huge protection racket in the New York City's garment district. Obviously today, famously, the Genovese crime family, along with the Gambinos, do run the garment district still to this day. Johnny would be arrested several times between 1926 and 37, but would never be brought to trial due to payoffs and witness intimidation. Johnny needed a legitimate job, at least from a no-show perspective, to pass off his income as legitimate. So through Lucky Luciano, he was given the position of executive secretary of the Allied Truckmen's Mutual Association, an employer association, and represented by the employers during a strike by 1,200 Teamsters in September of 1934. He was basically the mob's guy in control of that. In March of 1937, Johnny would be arrested for extortion, conspiracy, and racketeering, but would plead guilty and receive a 3-year stint in Sing Sing. After his release, Johnny would leave New York and head to Allentown, Pennsylvania, and he basically leaves because the heat had begun to get too much for him, and he needed somewhere to sort of lay low for a while. He would take the money that he saved from illegitimate enterprises and would open up a dress manufacturing plant, and he wasn't the first one to do that. Joe Bonanno also did that, as well as Russell Buffalino. He would sell the plant later on, taking a bribe of $11,200 to ensure that the plant would remain non-union before he sold it. This way, the new prospective owner wouldn't have to pay higher wages. He then would head back to New York and open up a dress wholesaling operation. He would then take the funds from that and dump it into the stock market, into real estate, and to trucking companies, basically making his money work for him. And it was an easy way to launder the money more than anything. In 1950, Johnny returned to the labor rackets, and he ends up getting appointed as the regional director of the United Auto Workers, the AFL, UAW-AFL, and would get handed 12 charters from paper locals in the garment district. Criminals formed the membership of the paper locals, and Johnny would basically shake them down for money, especially those who wished to remain union-free. If you had a union, higher wages, less profit, so there you go. He would end up turning around and shaking down employers who were not unionized. Then he would turn around and shake down the employers who wanted to avoid strikes and other labor issues. In July of 1952, Johnny Dio would be arrested for extortion. The New York State would then turn around and file income tax evasion charges. And Johnny was pretty much slick enough to ensure the right payoffs to avoid conviction for labor racketeering, but because of the accusation, he would be removed from his post in February of 53 and thrown out of the unions. Between 52 and 54, amid the labor racketeering scandal, Johnny Dio had to face the tax evasion charges. In New York State, they alleged that Johnny Dio had taken a bribe when selling his Pennsylvania dress factory, and he failed to report the actual bribe as income. As if anybody would fucking claim a fucking bribe is like unreported income. Like, it's so ridiculous. Dio denied the charges, but then would end up being found guilty anyway in March of 54 and was sentenced to 60 days in prison. Johnny Dio's association with the Teamsters and the ILA was a deep-rooted relationship. He was friendly with New York Teamsters leaders Martin T. Lackey and John J. O'Rourke. Their relationship went back to 1934 when Dio represented the employers in a trucking strike. By 1954, Dio again was deep within the Teamsters when the police suspected him of involvement in a protection racket run by Teamsters officials aimed directly at the trucking employees. His ties would deepen after he met Jimmy Hoffa in a hotel room, where Hoffa asked him for help in ousting Teamsters General President Dave Beck. Dave Beck basically was the Teamsters leader from 52 to 57, and he helped found the conference system of organization in the Teamsters Union. Shoots to fame in 1957 by repeatedly invoking his right against self-incrimination before a U.S. Senate committee investigating labor racketeering. Hoffa needed the mob. Hoffa really needed mob backing and the backing of those in the union. That way, Hoffa could get himself in a position, and he couldn't do it on his own. Now, famously, we know that Hoffa used Tony Provenzano and a lot of other people, Detroit, but really, Hoffa's really beginnings of union corruption was through Johnny Dio. And as we see, they want Dave Beck out of the way because he's a powerful guy, but Dave Beck himself is involved in union criminality as well. So between November 29th and December 15th of 1955, Johnny Dio obtains charters from the Teamsters for several paper locals. And what paper locals are is they're unions that have almost zero or very, very little membership, which is self-chartered and formed for the direct purpose of criminal acts. The saying paper local is really meant to say that the charter only exists on paper only. It's a fictitious front. Usually members were friends, families, and criminals. Paper locals could also be used in many different ways. Perhaps the best way of using a paper local was someone representing the paper local walks into a business and says, I can unionize your employees, and you're going to have to pay them more, but if you pay me, I'll walk the fuck away and you will have no problems. That's basically how the paper locals would use their strength, and the paper local can flip it taking a bribe and putting it down as union dues. So the paper local can walk in with no members and say, you're either going to join this union, or what is going to fucking happen is you're going to have a whole bunch of problems because the union's going to come in, your workers are going to get paid more. So if you pay us, you won't have that problem. And then they would take the money from the bribe or the payoff and they would mark it down as union dues. So on paper, it looks like they're a legitimate union. The other interesting thing about paper unions, too, is that if you can pull in a big bulk bullshit paper union, then you can sort of interject yourself into Teamsters and you can fight the political front of how unions organize. I know it sounds like hard to grasp, but it's basically simply saying that we're going to make a big bullshit union. We're going to put all of these fake members in, and then we're going to, when the political front has an argument, like Beck wants to have a political debate over which way the unions are going, well, if you're coming in with a paper union with 500 people that really don't exist, that's a lot of strength, and it puts friction into the union argument itself. So just hold tight. Hopefully I can explain it a little bit better as we get further along. All right, so O'Rourke, who was a close ally of Jimmy Hoffa, had been planning on challenging Lacey, who at the time was a Beck supporter, for the presidency of 125,000-member New York City Teamsters Joint Council. So a joint council here is everybody who regulates. It's how they regulate everything. If you're the leader of a joint council, you got a lot of power. So winning control of the delegate-rich joint council would put Hoffa in a better situation by ousting Beck, and could lead to other joint councils and locals who then would join Hoffa. It was a way that basically Hoffa could stack the deck in his favor. O'Rourke would go to bat for Hoffa, and then he would attempt to get Johnny Dio's locals admitted into the joint council. If you get them admitted in the joint council, then you could sway votes. This was all pre-planned and predestined for Hoffa to make a run. What happens is a political battle breaks out in the union over admitting new unions, because basically Beck fucking knew that Dio was a gangster. Dio had the fake paper unions and fake paper locals, and he knew that if somehow they allowed this group to get in, then Hoffa could use it as leverage to steal the unions from him. And that's essentially what it is. And the union knew that these were paper unions. They knew it was bullshit. And the problem was they had a vote, and it was divided. There was an election, and it was 50-50. So like 50 people voted for it, 50 people voted against it. And a lot of guys didn't want Dio's locals seated. They didn't want them to have any say in what was going on. So it ends up leading to a grand jury investigation, which was followed by several rulings by President Beck, and it followed a lawsuit by Lacey, which actually was successful. Lacey then withdrew from his re-election bid, and O'Rourke was elected president of the Joint Council. I firmly believe Lacey was probably paid off. Why he files a lawsuit, gets a bunch of money, et cetera, then all of a sudden just gets out of the fucking re-election bid, which basically allows O'Rourke to get to the head of the joint council, which enables O'Rourke to manipulate the council system to get Hoffa in and to do other things that they wanted to do. But it ends up really sort of being a bigger headache than probably needed to be. So, like I said, Lacey withdraws from the election bid, and O'Rourke was elected president of the Joint Council. In no certain terms, Hoffa and O'Rourke used mob influence to push Lacey out of the way. I said that earlier. It was a headache for them, but with him out of the way, O'Rourke took over the presidency of the Joint Council, and the deck was even more stacked against Beck. Immediately, more paper locals via Johnny Dio petitioned for membership, and the Teamsters ended up dismantling all of the Dio locals by 1959, which was okay because Hoffa still gets what he wants in the deal. In 1959, the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations in the U.S. Senate Committee on Government Operations began to hold hearings into labor racketeering. Senator John L. McClellan, who was the chair of the committee and the chair of the subcommittee, hired by Bobby Kennedy as the subcommittee's chief counsel and investigator. Dio sort of becomes the object of the subcommittee's commission questions in March of '56. At first, the committee limited the scope of the investigation to Dio's local scandals, but underneath all of that was the beginning of Bobby Kennedy's assault on Jimmy Hoffa. In January of 57, the U.S. Senate created the Select Committee on Improper Activities in Labor and Management. The committee was directed to study the extent of criminality and other criminal practices in the direction of labor management relations in or groups of employees or employers. In other words, they were just trying to stop the mafia's infiltration into the unions, which was already there. The government was already fucked, but anybody that they could try to push out of the way, they would. And Johnny Dio was the guy they really wanted to go after. Membership was derived from two standing committees, the Committee on Government Operations and the Committee on Labor and Public Welfare. The Select Committee continued to focus on Johnny Dio's activities, and then in February of 1957, the Select Committee released FBI wiretaps in which showed Jimmy Hoffa and Johnny Dio allegedly discussing the establishment of paper locals to organize New York City's 30,000 taxi drivers. Then they tried to use the charter as means of extorting money from a wide variety of employers, and Hoffa then could use the charter to bolster his control of the Teamsters. So it was all about, let's get this union, let's get that union, there's strength in numbers, and we'll be able to do what we want. It basically came down to money and power. Testifying before the committee, Hoffa claimed that the tape only showed that he wanted the best organizer in the city to work on the taxi organizer campaign, and that he couldn't have engaged in any sort of conspiracy because Dio was not a member of the union, which is actually true. The committee accused Hoffa of being behind in at least the brains of the Dio locals and arranging $400,000 loan to gaft the ridden ILA, International Longshoremen's Association, in a bid to take over that union and gain Teamsters control of the waterfront as well as their warehouses. Dio at the time was of the hearing, believe it or not, was actually in prison on bribery and conspiracy charges, but they would parole him so that he could testify at the hearings. The committee had developed evidence that the UAW-AFL had paid Dio $16,000 to leave the union, but he wouldn't. And even after he was ousted and thrown out of the union, he still maintained control over that union for over a year. Michigan Governor G. Menon Williams would testify that when he was the director of Menon Toiletries, Johnny Dio asked him for a $15,000 bribe in order to call off the 1951 strike. And a 2-hour period, while Dio was asked to testify, he would invoke the Fifth Amendment over 160 times and simply refused to answer any questions. The committee's evidence became undermined when the star witness against Johnny Dio was found to be what they deemed, not my words, theirs, mentally retarded. In the middle of the Teamsters paper local scandal, Dio was indicted for planning the acid attack on a big-mouth newspaper journalist named Victor Reisel. At 3 a.m. on April 5th of 1956, an unknown assailant threw a vat of acid in the face of this journalist, Victor Reisel. Reisel was leaving a late-night interview at Lindy's, and the attack left Reisel permanently Ray Charles, if you catch the drift. The FBI would identify Abram Telvey as the assailant in August of 56, but it was too late as Telvey ends up getting whacked in July of 56, allegedly by the mob because he refused to keep his mouth shut, and he was trying to basically shake down the mob for $50,000 after what he did. He was paid $500 to throw the acid, but told them, if you don't give me $50,000, I'm going to talk. Well, basically they handled that. Dio would end up getting arrested in August of 56 for that conspiracy in the attack of Reisel, would plead not guilty and would be released on a $100,000 bond, even though the prosecution would later link him to the actual Telvey murder itself. Dio would be tried separately for the attack on Reisel. Joe Carlino, who was an associate of Dio's who had actually hired Telvey, pleaded out on October 22nd, and the prosecution split Dio's trial from the others. Carlino later would testify that Dio had ordered Gandolfo Maranti to find a hitman, and Maranti would ultimately ask around, which led them to the hiring of Telvey for $500. Maranti and Sidecar Bono would end up being arrested and indicted, but would ultimately be found guilty. Bando was just another middleman for Maranti and Telvey. Conspiracy charges against Dio, and listen, I know this sounds crazy, but the conspiracy shit's just going to keep going. Conspiracy charges against Dio would later get dropped despite the convictions of his cohorts. Dio's attorney continued to delay the trial for 6 months with motion after motion after motion. And basically all he was doing was buying Johnny Dio time. When the trial actually began, Carlino now, who officially becomes a rat, and Morante officially becomes a rat, they did something rather magical. They end up both recanting their stories and recant everything that they said, which led to Dio's arrest and indictment to begin with. They claimed they didn't know who ordered the hit on Reisel. They didn't know anything. They had no idea who killed Telvey or who ordered it, and it was enough for the prosecution to pretty much scream, "What the fuck?" And Dio walks away unscathed, or so he thought. That trial, along with the others and the Teamsters bullshit, was enough to make Dio a recognized figure, which would add to his legal problems. Just after walking away from the Reisel issue, he would be indicted for extortion and conspiracy. The indictment alleged that Dio and others had extorted money from truck drivers in the New York City garment industry and received bribes from employers in exchange for refusing to call strikes. Dio's trial was due to begin in January of 1957, but once again, the key government witness refused to testify and claimed mental defection. The prosecution would press on, but Dio's attorney once again kept pushing motion after motion after motion. The court ends up getting fed up with it and basically disallowed any motions that were derived from Dio's attorney, and then the court would impose a special jury to try him, and his bond would be revoked in June, and his trial would resume. Dio would get convicted of extortion in July of that year. All the witnesses who had once lined up to speak against him all became incoherent, if they even showed up at all. The jury would convict Dio regardless, and he would be sentenced to 2 years in prison. As Dio was actually awaiting sentencing in that case, a federal grand jury would indict him on tax evasion charges, which is the second time he faced that charge. And it's basically what the government did against all gangsters they couldn't get on real charges. They did it to Al Capone. And that was the only way they could really hammer gangsters when they didn't have any other, so to speak, dirt on them. Dio would once again deny the charges, and he would use his lawyer to stall the trial, but the government stopped the trial mid-form. The reason why was because there were more extortion and conspiracy charges that were being handed down for Dio. Because the Reisel case had failed, the state was pretty pissed off, so they decided to act on the 56 indictment, and Dio's second trial for labor racketeering began 2 days after his tax evasion case was stopped. Dio then tried to delay again, but it didn't work, and he was found guilty of both charges and would be sentenced to 15 years in Sing Sing. Dio would appeal his conviction, and on June 23, 1959, the New York State Appellate Court reversed his conviction, but it would be short-lived. Within an hour of walking out of prison after having his conviction overturned, he would be arrested again on federal tax charges. His tax evasion trial would begin in March 1960, and he would be found guilty. He would be sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. While he had won an earlier appeal for racketeering, it was found prior that his retrial for those crimes that he filed his appellate paperwork too late. Therefore, that appeal was invalid, and his conviction for those crimes were reinstated. Dio would serve time and end up being paroled in 1963 and would go to work for the Consumer's Kosher Provision. It basically was a meat product supplier. In April of 1966, he and his son Dominic would be indicted for bankruptcy fraud. According to the prosecution, Consumer Kosher was losing a lot of money and a lot of market share to his competitor, American Kosher Provisions. Owner Herman Rose went to the Lucchese crime family for help, and it was Dominic Dio who told Rose that his father Johnny was about to get out of prison, about to get paroled, and that definitely Johnny could help him, but in sort of repayment for that Johnny needed a legit job to secure early release from prison, which is exactly what happened. And this is exactly why Dio gets out of prison so quickly. Sadly, Rose would die in 1964, and the Genoveses, along with Johnny Dio, would take over the American Kosher, and then they would merge the warring companies, which was a very, very slick move. You have two companies that are fighting over products and salaries and profits. Let's merge them together. Then those two companies join together, and then they go to war with other kosher companies in the city. They would begin to dominate the city and the United States. Local unions of the amalgamated meat cutters, who were controlled by the Lucchese's and Genovese crime families, would selectively strike other kosher meat producers, causing supermarkets to switch to the merged companies in order to ensure a steady supply and profit. So in other words, they take the two biggest warring companies, put them together, and then these two companies go after everybody else. It's a way to control the flow, the market. Quite an ingenious idea for the time period. They ended up controlling that market. Distributors were either bribed or shaken down to switch to the correct meat suppliers. The company then would slash costs by distributing spoiled and rotten meat to stores, which would raise the profits dramatically. Companies like First National Kosher, Mizrach Kosher, Tel Aviv Kosher, Finest Kosher got absorbed, and they end up getting taken over when they collapsed and the assets transferred. They would name Dominic the vice president and Thomas Plumeri the president. And then Consumer Kosher would end up filing for bankruptcy in 1965. Dio, who was not part of the management team, ordered his son and nephew to sell more than $33,000 in raw and processed meat assets and to disperse the money received to Johnny Dio and other mafia associates from the Lucchese's and the Genovese crime family. Dio would end up getting indicted and convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He would appeal that conviction, but it wouldn't work, and he would head to prison in 1970. While he was awaiting his appeal, prior to that conviction, he would be indicted again for securities fraud. According to the prosecution, Dio and Anthony DiLorenzo, the heir apparent to the Genovese crime family, conspired to purchase 28,000 shares of Belmont Franchising Corporation, which was a worthless over-the-counter stock. Dio and DiLorenzo would open up numerous bullshit brokerages, under bullshit names and purchase shares of Belmont for themselves in an attempt to inflate the price. More or less, this was a pump and dump scheme. They sold stock to other investors for around about $1 million. Lucchese member Michael Hellerman, who was part of that conspiracy, turned into a rat piece of shit and ends up entering the WITSEC protection. At the trial, Johnny Dio was accused of running the stock fraud, but also beating the original owner out of shares in order to force him to sell to begin with for pennies on the dollar. Halfway through the trial, all hell broke loose when Hawaiian Senator Hiram Fong pleaded guilty to charges of trying to stop the government from inquiring about Johnny Dio and the Belmont case. Dio's attorney argued that Hellerman was a fucking rat and a liar and shouldn't be believed, and the jury actually agreed, acquitting Johnny Dio of all charges. Within a year, he would be indicted again for stock fraud, and he had just finished his stint for bankruptcy fraud. The prosecution alleged that Dio, along with Carmine Tramunti and Vincent Alloy and Michael Hellerman and others, floated $300,000 into a fake stock at-your-service leasing corporation, which was a luxury car leasing company which did extensive business with organized crime figures. Under the scheme, Dio and others bribed securities dealers to sell the stock and pocket the money paid by investors. It's an early version, once again, of a pump-and-dump scheme. Bernie Madoff, that type of shit. This time around, the jury didn't believe the defense's assertions that Hellerman was full of shit and a rat, and he would be found guilty. He would be sentenced to 19 years in prison to run concurrent with other charges. Dio would be sent to Lewisburg Federal Prison, where he was known as a mover and shaker, being able to attain prisoners better jobs and would be able to smuggle good Italian food. And he also did time with Henry Hill and Paul Vario. He made money in prison, as well as being highly respected as someone who could get anything with inside the prison. He would appeal for early parole, but would be denied twice. He would end up getting sick and eventually would be moved to a hospital, public hospital, where he would die in 1979. Now, some little tidbits are Frank Pellegrino, Nicky Eyes from Goodfellas, played Johnny Dio. Johnny Dio was also the basis of the character Johnny Friendly in the film On the Waterfront. Now, I tried not to rush through this only because of time constraints, but the one thing I wanted to make perfectly clear, especially about Johnny Dio, is if you look at the time period in which he came up, he's really an innovator in a lot of ways. He understood how the unions worked. He pretty much was able to get Hoffa involved in the Teamsters and the union and the labor racketeering, which is really what gave Hoffa everything that Hoffa became. But the more interesting, circumspect thing that I find about Johnny Dio is, you're not saying this murder and mayhem type of stuff. This is a guy who was an incredible earner, would use his contacts to infiltrate every union there was, and he made everyone millions and millions and millions of dollars. More interesting than that is he's really the first guy in the history of the mafia, probably not the first, but the one that's most well noted is the one guy that knew how to get involved in pump and dump schemes with stock. Now, we see this kind of stuff today. And maybe in the late 80s, we saw some of this stuff, and I think it's more commonplace today. But the reality of it is that think about what he was able to attain, and we're talking the 1950s here. This is not like the 1990s. This was a relatively huge scheme that he was able to sort of come up with and sort of run by himself without any interference from anybody. And then you look at the kosher wars and what he was able to do there. I'm not saying it was probably the smartest thing, but the guy obviously had a serious acumen for business. And you know, I hear this all the time from reporters and book writers, is that some of these guys that are in this lifestyle are fucking on a genius level of intelligence. And if they just marketed themselves the right way and went sort of down the straight line, they would be billionaires over and over. But the reality is that when you have muscle and can control the unions and push people around, that's how you get your money. Some would say that's the easy way out, but that's the gangster way. But if you look at Johnny Dio, you take Johnny Dio out of Jimmy Hoffa's life, Jimmy Hoffa never gets past Beck. Jimmy Hoffa never meets Tony Provenzano. Jimmy Hoffa never gets to where he gets if it's not from Johnny Dio. And to me, that's just an interesting part of history a lot of people don't talk about, because a lot of people, you know, when they think of Jimmy Hoffa, they talk about Frank Sheeran, talk about Russell Buffalino, but this is all prior to those sort of relationships. And if it's not for Johnny Dio getting the fake paper locals and getting fucking Beck the fuck out of the way and not paying off Lacey to get the fuck out of the way, you know, things like the Garment District, the things like the Teamsters, Jimmy Hoffa maybe never gets to where he got. And I'm not saying that Jimmy Hoffa was, like, by all means, the best thing that ever happened for the Teamsters, but for a long time, Jimmy Hoffa was the guy for the mob, the front man for the mob, until he got a little fucking wise and a little sour and ended up paying with his life because he couldn't shut his fucking mouth. So in the history of how we look back on labor union and labor racketeering, Johnny Dio's at the fucking top. Absolutely at the top. This guy moved in a lot of different circles and was able to flip a quarter off of about anything. So that's pretty much the story of Johnny Dio. And I like to cover lesser known guys because I think what, for me, sometimes the blood and guts and the violence of it all is fine, but I like to look at a lot of guys who are instrumental in organizing things and putting things together that shape the future for organized crime. Luciano, good example of that. You know, there were some arguments. Vito Genovese, in his own kind of way, did some things, and Carlo Gambino. But I mean, ultimately, you look at like Luciano and Meyer Lansky, and they put a lot of stuff together. But when it came to labor racketeering in the unions, Johnny Dio was the guy. He was the guy before Hoffa ever was. But as we've seen throughout history, when you cannot stay sort of out of trouble and out of the limelight, even though they removed this guy from the unions because of accusations, which is legitimately legal, he still kept control of the union. So I can only imagine how much the Lucchese's and Genovese's made off of Johnny Dio being in charge. Just an absolute racketeer. And I think that when you're going to look at the history, like I know I'm repeating myself a little bit, but when you look at the history of what he was able to do, just the idea that he was able to manipulate stock fraud and do all this kind of stuff in the 50s is incredible. The guys weren't doing that before him, but everybody learned from his mistakes and carried it forward. All right, so as usual, you can hit me up at Real Mob Talk 7 on Twitter. Check me out on Facebook at Mob Talk Radio. We will be back next week with an all-new show. Big show, Q&A. And any little news that's breaking in between. As usual, I wanted to thank everybody for listening, even the haters. All we ever ask you to do here is just give us a like, give us a share. Any questions, personal questions you might have, complaints, concerns, you know where to send them because you always do. With all that being said, if you are in the New York area, it is snowing. I don't know what the fuck that means when you consider that we've been getting this dusting shit and then it fucking melts after an hour. Just ones that like to get hammered. You know what I mean? Oh yeah, it's coming down now. So, all that being said, everybody have a great week. We will be back next week with an all-new show, all-new topic, and all-new information.